presenter today is Iris Mosa, and she is presenting Help-Seeking Behaviors in Black College Students. Ms. Mosa joins us from Indiana State University, where she is a staff counselor. Welcome.
All right, well, as was stated, my name is Iris Mosa, and I am currently a staff counselor at Indiana State University. Just a little bit about me. I graduated from Rhodes College with a bachelor's in psychology, and then actually completed my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling at Indiana State University, or ISU, which is what I'm going to call it for short. And after graduating, I left ISU and worked at a different institution in the Indianapolis area, and then this past year returned home to ISU, where I had done my internship. So it's been great just being back to this familiar space. And I'm excited to talk about this topic today because, quite honestly, this is something that I have been thinking about long before I actually became a counselor. This is something that I took note of when I was in undergrad, when I was a college student who, was considering seeking help. And I attended a predominantly white institution. And I just remember, the conversations that I was having with my peers of color, particularly my Black peers, and just some of the comments and ideas and beliefs that they had about counseling and the counseling center. Me personally, I did utilize the counseling center, and I'm so grateful that I did, but it just really bothered me that I had peers that were suffering who, for whatever reason, and I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of those reasons in this presentation, just could not see themselves just utilizing that space for support or trusting the counseling service on campus. So, as I entered my career, I have, of course, worked with Black students, both therapeutically, but also pretty extensively in terms of outreach in both roles that I have been in. I have served as a liaison for diversity and inclusion, which has allowed me to have conversations outside of the counseling room with Black students to hear a little bit more about their attitudes on counseling, mental health, things of that nature. So some of that is going to be incorporated into the information that I present to you. Just to get started here, some of the objectives for today's presentation are to identify at least 3 obstacles that hinder Black students from seeking professional mental health, identifying at least 3 factors that could increase the likeliness of a Black student reaching out to their counseling center, and then learning at least 3 practical strategies that university counseling centers can use to increase accessibility to Black students. As we get started here, I just want to explicitly assert who I'm talking about. When I'm mentioning Black students, I'm talking about students who who identify as a single race, Black, or who are multiracial, either non-Hispanic or Black Hispanic, and Black is one of the racial identities that they hold. So if you are a counselor, because I know we have a diverse audience here, you probably know this, but in case others don't, there is a general trend that racial and ethnic minorities utilize counseling services less than their white counterparts. And research on specifically Black college students shows that, the case is the same. They underutilize college mental health services as compared to their white counterparts, and even as compared to some of their other non-Black minority counterparts. And the research shows that of Black students who do choose to use the counseling center, it's typically when issues have become so severe that, they pretty much don't have a choice. Either they are failing, they're at risk of academic suspension or expulsion, and counseling has become something that is mandated for them to stay at the institution, or there's some kind of crisis and they are brought to the counseling center through residence life. So a 2020 survey at UC Berkeley showed that in spite of, Black college students really underutilizing counseling services, they're actually, reporting the same or greater levels of distress. So this survey showed that 40% of Black college students screened positive for depression, as compared to 33% of their white counterparts. And in that same survey regarding anxiety, both Black college students and their white counterparts screened positive for generalized anxiety disorder at a rate of 40%. And as I was doing my literature review, a resource that I definitely consulted with a lot was the Steve Fund Crisis Response Task Force. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that resource, but it's something that is very current. It was published we're still in the pandemic technically, but kind of like peak pandemic time, and it really looked at the needs and the concerns of minority students, both pre-pandemic and then like kind of post-pandemic, if you will. But that report showed that 26% of Black students are seeking mental health treatment at their universities versus 46% of white students. So kind of the overall goal of this presentation is discussing why this disparity exists and some things that we can do to help bridge the gap. So I wanted to start off with just naming some of the unique stressors that Black college students experience on their campuses. The biggest one, the one that will probably be mentioned over and over in this presentation, is just minority status stress. So that is essentially stress associated with being a minority, a Black person on campus. And some of the things that Black college students are facing, just as they are facing in society, are racism, discrimination, microaggressions, hostility, on some campuses, even hate crimes. And Black college students are actually more likely to experience minority status stress than other minority groups. And this minority stress is even greater when they are at a predominantly white institution. So we'll come back to that, like I said, because that's a huge one. Another factor that was pretty frequently identified in literature was imposter syndrome. So for those of you who are unaware of that term, that is essentially holding this belief, this limiting belief that you are not equipped, you're not deserving of, you are not able to handle the opportunity that has been given to you, or the opportunity that you are currently trying to navigate. And there are a lot of reasons that Black college students come to college with imposter syndrome, feeling like they don't belong there, that they are incapable of succeeding. And that can be anything from messages that they've heard societally to messages that they have explicitly heard from people in their lives, whether that's teachers, family members, peers even. And so, we'll talk a little bit more in the next coming slide about the impact of trying to navigate college while having this profound doubt about yourself and your ability to succeed. The next one is stereotype threat. So again, just coming to college aware of the fact that certain stereotypes exist and that in 2021, certain people do, believe these stereotypes. And just some examples of them are that African-American or Black individuals do not value education as highly as, their white counterparts. Another one is that just in general, they are genetically less intelligent. And there are people in 2021 that hold these beliefs. And some of them are on our college campuses, and that can really, I'm sure you can imagine, put this tremendous pressure on a student to succeed and to not, in their eyes, confirm these stereotypes. The next thing that is on this list of stressors is just current events. So I'm sure we're all aware of, the George Floyd situation. And if you were on a college campus, I'm sure that, it was discussed there. I'm sure you were probably exposed to a wide variety of responses, both from individuals as well as your institution as a whole. And research shows that Black students are looking at how their institutions are responding to these situations. What kind of messages are you putting out? Are you putting out anything at all? Or is this just, something that's happening that you don't care about? Are you condemning racism? Are you, are you taking any actions or steps towards protesting things that are going on? All of those actions or inactions, students are paying attention to, and they are internalizing that as messages about how much they matter on the campus and, their level of safety on the campus. What might be done should they experience, some kind of hate crime or, racist incident on their campus. All of that impacts those feelings of safety. And then we have anti-racism and activist work. And I couple that with racial battle fatigue. So again, with the George Floyd situation, maybe a lot of you on your campuses saw students, protesting and, confronting administration. I know at my institution, a group of students actually came up with a list of demands that was, sent to the president around the institution's, position when it comes to being anti-racist and really addressing some of those DEI issues. And when you are engaged in that work on top of just trying to be a student, trying to go to class, trying to get your work done, trying to navigate a healthy social life, that's a heavy burden to carry. And, that can lead to that racial battle fatigue of just really being mentally and emotionally drained and depleted, which can then, have repercussions when it comes to doing what you need to do as a college student and succeeding academically. Something that I found in the literature that I thought was really interesting was that Pew Research Center has found that Black students who attend college are more likely to say that they have faced a number of discriminatory incidents. And I have a graphic that was included with that research article that shows the actual breakdown and percentages of some of these situations. So as you can see here, we have people acting as if they were suspicious of them. So of the Black individuals who responded to this survey who completed high school or less, 59% of them endorsed having that experience, whereas of those who attended some college or more, 71% of them endorsed that experience. And then the cumulative number of just all Blacks, regardless of educational attainment, was 65%. And then the next one, people acting as if they were not smart, we have 52% for people who have high school or less, 67% for some college or more, compared to the 60% of all Blacks. And so I'm not gonna go through each one, but I'll just give you a second to look and see how that trend continues, that those individuals who have attended some college or more are reporting experiencing these incidences of discrimination or microaggressions at a higher rate. And when I was kind of just analyzing this, and of course also reading the corresponding literature, it seems like a couple of theories to this are that individuals who have attended some college or more are more likely to be a part of or frequent predominantly white spaces. Therefore, they're just more likely to have opportunities to experience these incidences, if that makes sense. And then I think the other one was that they simply have more knowledge and awareness of, you know, like what a microaggression is. And because they have that increased knowledge that comes with being in academia, they're more likely to notice and therefore endorse experiencing these things. All right. Next slide. Okay. So this next slide is just kind of an overview of some of the psychological repercussions of the stressors that we just talked about in the previous slides. So survey of research shows that Black college students are, as a result of these unique stressors, experiencing increased anxiety, trauma responses that can include anything from, you know, hypervigilance to, you know, kind of almost dissociating, you know, when they're on their college campus in their classes as a means of kind of protecting themselves from having to deal with these situations and dealing with the hurt of these situations. You know, we have people who are walking around with these like hyperactivated nervous systems who are, you know, maybe interpersonally being seen as impulsive because they're just on guard because of some of the situations that they have already experienced on their college campus. Then we have increased depression, which I think would make sense when you're feeling like an outsider in your environment, or you're getting messages, whether they're explicit or not, that you don't belong, or that, you know, you're most likely not going to succeed. We have feelings of detachment. We have students who are internalizing this stigma, which is then leading to self-fulfilling prophecies. So they're feeling the doubt, they're feeling maybe the lack of support, the lack of belief, and they are living up to those low expectations. And then we have John Henryism, which I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that term, but that is a term that was coined in the 1970s by, his name, Sherman, and the last name just escaped me, but you can Google it if you want. He was an African-American epidemiologist and researcher. And This is a term that describes a coping skill that minority individuals will adapt, where they will start expending extreme effort and energy to prove themselves, to prove that they can complete a task or that they can succeed, but they do so at the expense of their physiological or mental health. And this term is actually based off of the story of John Henry, who was a slave who worked really, really hard, physically hard, to complete a task, to please his slave owner, to the point that when he had completed the task, he actually died because he had overexerted himself. So that is, I just think that is such a powerful concept and illustration of how a lot of our Black college students, feel like they really have to overexert themselves, that they have to push themselves, they have to persevere and, really hang on to the notion of grit in order to, defy stereotypes or prove people in their lives or even, societally wrong. And then we have lower retention rates, which is just associated with, students who are struggling with their mental health in general and not seeking proper support. And then I've already mentioned this, but another impact can just be feeling out of place, feeling lonely, feeling like you don't belong. And that is usually an exacerbated impact when we're talking about predominantly white institutions. So now we're going to move to some of the barriers to utilizing university counseling centers. And the first one that was highlighted in the literature was just higher rates of perceived stigma of mental illness. So in general, Black college students tend to have this idea that having mental health issues or seeking counseling is more looked down upon than their white counterparts do. So just in general, stigma around mental health, they have perceived that to be higher than their white counterparts. Another barrier is, and this is a lot of barriers in one, but cultural stigmas and misconceptions about mental health and treatment, because there are a number of them. So some examples are that typically within Black culture, and I want to emphasize typically when I'm talking about any of these things, because I do need to acknowledge that no race, no culture is monolithic. So we're not talking about everyone, but these are just things that we're commonly seeing and things that might fit the majority. So typically there is an emphasis on religious and spiritual faith and reliance. So I can't tell you how many Black college students I've worked with, who feel a sense of guilt about coming to counseling because they've been told by, people in their lives, whether that's family members, friends, that their depression would get better if they would just pray more, if they would trust God more, if they would, start going to church consistently, if they would pour into scripture, those kinds of things. So that obviously hinders individuals from, feeling like coming to counseling or seeking that professional support is the right thing to do. Another one that was highlighted in literature is this internalized stigma that having mental health issues is indicative of personal weakness. That, struggling with your mental health means there's some kind of character defect that you have, whether that's that you're not strong enough, You're not resilient enough, you're weak, you let things get to you too much. So a lot of, Black college students are just kind of having that mindset around mental health, which of course would prevent them from, validating their concern as a legitimate mental health concern by going to counseling. And then we have this idea that I have just spoken on, which is, just feeling like grit and perseverance are, almost like cultural characteristics and staples that as Black individuals, this is what we're used to. We're used to adversity. We're used to just, bucking up and pushing through. If you can't do that, if you need that outside support, again, it can be seen as weak. And then we have cultural mistrust, which is this idea that Black individuals and minority individuals in general can be hesitant and reluctant to seek professional help, whether that's medical and or mental health, simply because of history and the fact that there have been discrepancies, and there still are discrepancies and disparities in the quality of healthcare that minority individuals have gotten or have had access to. And so, just kind of having this idea in their mind of like, why should I trust this person? This person, I don't know that this person is going to get me. I don't know that they're going to know how to deal with me or handle me. I don't know that they're going to understand, some of the cultural implications that, are related to why I might be coming in. And then finally, under this umbrella of cultural stigmas and misconceptions, there's just general stigma from and preference of in-group support. So this idea of keeping things private, keeping things within the in-group, which is family, friends, the church family, and, just not going out to random strangers and, sharing the family business. There's a lot of stigma around that, around going out of those systems. So moving on to another barrier that came up quite a bit in the literature, lack of diversity on staff. And this is something that we're going to talk about again later on in the presentation, but a lot of Black college students, because of some of these cultural stigmas and misconceptions that we just discussed, do indeed, seek someone who looks like them. And again, this is not all Black college students, because I've done triage appointments with, Black students who are like, I don't care, I have no preference, give me anyone. So this is not all, but a great number of Black college students, especially those who have had some of those more significant negative experiences with medical providers, or just like on their campus in general, and who are especially feeling that lack of safety on their campus. They want someone who they think can better understand, can better relate to, their experiences. I've had a student in my office who spoke about just feeling like in the past, when they were working with a white counselor, they felt as though a lot of their session, and this is their words, not mine, but they felt as though a lot of the session was, quote, wasted just trying to get their counselor to understand the weight of what they're talking about, the weight of their experience with discrimination or a microaggression, and just, feeling like their counselor didn't get it, and that, they were just expending so much effort on that piece, rather than, the actual counseling part and working on the healing and all of that. But again, I want to emphasize that this is not the belief or the feeling of all Black college students. And I also want to acknowledge that I know as a clinician that white counselors can do this work. They can work very effectively with, students of color. And we'll talk more about that too in upcoming slides. But something else around this issue of lack of diversity on staff is that a lot of research has shown that students of color don't necessarily feel like they always have to work with a counselor of color, but just seeing that there is a counselor of color on staff, even if they're not working with them, makes a huge difference. To them, it sends this message that the counseling center does value diversity. It's not just some statement that's plastered on the wall. They, have been intentional about trying to diversify staff, and it just makes the space feel more welcoming. It increases the likelihood that they would give a white counselor a chance because they are getting this message from just seeing diversity that these are things that are thought about by the counseling center as a whole. Does that make sense? All right. So, there was one more. Lack of awareness about mental health issues. So a lot of the research that I looked at showed that a lot of what keeps some Black college students from going to counseling is the fact that they don't really have awareness of what mental health issues are. Like they, for example, they're experiencing depression, but they don't know that it's depression. Maybe they just maybe they're just walking around angry, but they, don't have that awareness that it is, depression manifesting as anger, or trauma manifesting as anger, or whatever the case may be. And so they don't even know that what they're dealing with is something that can and should be addressed in counseling. So that's another barrier. And again, we'll talk about ways that we can work around some of these barriers and increase accessibility. So this first slide of strategies is more so, I would say, some of it is specifically applicable to university counseling centers, but some of it is also just kind of almost like institution-wise, culture-wise, like the culture of the institution. So the first one is that the university as a whole acknowledges racism as a problem that they are not immune to. Because again, a lot of, as you saw with these barriers, a lot of what can increase or decrease the likeliness of students seeking support from the counseling center is whether or not they feel as though that space is going to be safe to them. And if they're at a university that promotes this message that everything is rainbows and sunshine and racism doesn't even exist, then what are the chances that they're going to trust that university's counseling center with their experiences of racism? So, just culturally, I just wanted to throw that in there, the culture of the institution and their relation to acknowledging and addressing DEI issues. The next is hiring diverse counselors, as we discussed. And it's a bonus if, you can at least have someone on your staff who has experience or expertise in race-based stress and just, has maybe more in-depth knowledge of how to reach these students and how to work effectively with them. The next is fostering collaboration with natural partners. So most, I know not all, but most college counseling centers fall under the Division of Student Affairs. So, looking around in that division, who can you work with that has maybe a different reach, and who can you collaborate with and join efforts in so that, you are increasing awareness of the counseling center, what it does, the services it offers, who is on staff, putting those faces out there, allowing students to be exposed to the people on your staff through this collaboration, so that, again, you can kind of demystify what the counseling center is, who's on the staff, and just make it more welcoming and approachable to students. The next is the Let's Talk program. A lot of you might, if you are a counselor, you might have heard about this program. A lot of universities over the last couple of years have been adopting some form of this program. The institution that I was at last implemented it, and currently at ISU, it looked differently this year with COVID, but we also implement the Let's Talk program. And this is a very simple kind of outreach program where you are, I feel, based off of my experience last year and this year, it seems to work best when you are literally physically meeting students where they're at. But basically the idea of the program is that you are creating informal opportunities for students to interact with, have conversations with your counselors without them actually having to formally sign up for services. So you can think of it as like office hours for your counselors. And students can come in, maybe they have like a very acute minor situation going on in their life that they want to talk through, and they can have a conversation with that counselor for 15 minutes and get some guidance, some support, and that's all they really need. They don't need they don't need ongoing counseling. So that's one way that it can be used. But also, in my experience, when I engaged in Let's Talk in my previous institution, I held office hours in our diversity center, where a lot of our minority student organizations, housed their offices. Those minority students were always frequenting that space. So I became this familiar face, a representative from the counseling center, and I had those students, come up to me for a wide variety of conversations. But what was interesting was that a lot of them were actually them coming to me to talk about counseling, to talk about some of the stigma that they felt about counseling, some of the messages that they'd heard from their family members about counseling. And they just had questions about, what does counseling really look like? If I come for my first session, do I sign a contract? Or, am I stuck in counseling if I sign up? Just wanting more information, wanting to have a conversation with me, an actual counselor. And what would happen usually was that through those conversations, they would actually end up saying that, oh, counseling isn't as scary, or it's not just for white people, because here's this counselor of color in our space right now, and maybe I can give it a chance. Maybe there can be benefit to it. So that's the Let's Talk program. Another thing that I saw in the literature that I thought was really neat was this conceptualization of anti-racism as wellness. So again, speaking to just the overall campus culture, being able to promote the fact that, when we are individually and collectively working to eradicate racism, working to address DEI issues and increase inclusivity, we are all together becoming healthier in, our mind, our body, our spirit. This is a safer place for everyone. And so just kind of including that in your models of wellness can really send a positive message to those students who might wonder, whether or not, or let me rephrase that, who wonder like where they fit in to, the larger campus community and the value that they have. And then next is just programming that raises awareness and acknowledges the fact that these cultural stigmas exist within these groups. So I'm thinking of a program that I did at my last institution with the Latinx student organization, where the whole program was around just debunking some of the stigmas and myths that they have heard, from their families, from their friends, just culturally. And then we kind of ended with an exercise where we wrote down, those stigmas and those misconceptions and myths on strips of paper. And then we ripped them up and just like got rid of them, as though we were getting rid of that stigma that gets in the way of them getting the support that they need. And then I think the last general one is also thinking about implementing programming that affirms and explores ethnic identity rather than just racial, because research shows that in minority individuals with strong ethnic identity do have a higher likelihood of seeking help, and having a strong ethnic identity is also just associated with higher psychological well-being. So, okay, I know time, okay, we're almost at the end because I know that we need time for discussion and questions. So this next slide is more specific to strategies for counselors working, in the counseling room. And some of this is stuff that you probably learned in your classes when you were becoming a counselor, but I think that that stuff obviously continues to be relevant, and sometimes we need refreshers and reminders of some of the basic things that we can do to, to make ourselves safer and more accessible, and to make the counseling room feel more of a safe place. So the first is adopting that cultural humility, just remembering that when you're working with your clients, you are other-oriented. It is about their experience. It's about their worldview. Even if, they're talking about something that you may not know exists because you haven't experienced it, or, whatever your stance is on it, it doesn't matter in that room, because their culture and their worldview and their lives and how they're experiencing it is what takes precedent. So just remembering that, validating that the fact that cultural mistrust does exist or can exist, naming it for what it is. And along those lines, just being open about the intersection of culture and help seeking early on. So when I'm working with students of color, in the first or second session, there's usually some kind of conversation around what it's like for them to be in counseling, and given their identity, and because for a lot of them it's a huge step, or it's a step that they're taking for themselves that someone in their life, maybe their mom, their friend, whatever, disagrees with. And so just really working to acknowledge that and to validate, the strength and the courage that it took for them to do what they needed to do to take care of themselves, regardless of some of the stigmas and, just pushback that they might be experiencing in their life. And then, of course, committing to that multicultural competence and lifelong learning, because times are always changing, cultures are always evolving. And, you know, as we are out in the field conducting research, there's always just new things to learn, new strategies, new interventions, new things to think about. So just remembering, you know, remembering those components of knowledge, awareness, and skills. Knowledge, you know, being that you're here today at this conference, you know, trying to, you know, just be aware of what's going on, some of these issues that are important to our field and that are important to creating a safe and inclusive college campus, but then also having awareness of who you are, what you bring to these spaces, because we all come with something, you know, biases, our own lived experiences that can shape how we, you know, view certain things or certain people. Just being aware of all of that and being willing to, you know, address it and work through it so that you're not bringing that into the counseling room with you. And then finally, skills, you know, learning, like I said, those specific strategies or interventions that make sense for who you're working with. And then along those lines, making sure that we are not culturally sensitive treatment. It's great. You should be culturally sensitive when you're interacting with anyone. But even better than that is being aware of culturally specific treatment models. So if there, you know, are evidence-based treatments out there that, you know, are shown to be more effective with certain individuals from certain identities, then use those treatment models, you know. Of course, you're still going to be culturally sensitive as you're using them, but that trumps, you know, just trying to be culturally sensitive. And then finally, going back to, you know, the emphasis and value of spirituality and religion in Black culture. Assess when you're working with your student, assess, you know, what role culture and religion and spirituality plays in their lives, and, you know, think about how you can incorporate that into the work that you're doing, because that is a strength that they have. That's a protective factor. So how are you going to, you know, leverage that and use that for the benefit of your student and the therapeutic work? And that is pretty much it for the presentation portion. I just wanted to throw this quote up there because I think, well, I'll read it first. The beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it's the only way forward. And I like this quote because you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know everything. And like, what's important is that you are willing to be humble. You're willing to adopt that cultural humility and have an open mind about how other people might be experiencing life, how other people might be experiencing your campus, your counseling center, and, you know, just committing to doing what you can to, like I said, to create this collective wellness, you know, this collective safety for everyone that's a part of your community. And then the last thing that I included in my PowerPoint is just some reflection questions that maybe you can take with you back to your spaces. You can think about them on an individual level, or maybe even like as a counseling center staff, or just, you know, wherever you come from, and however you feel these questions are, you know, relevant to the work that you do. So I'll just, I guess, leave them up here for a second, but then also obviously the PowerPoint has been uploaded. So if you want to, go back and look at them that way, you feel free to do that. So here they are. And then I have my references and my contact information.
Hey, we had a question come in. Someone said, I like the idea that Let's Talk is viewed as a culturally sensitive model of treatment for meeting Black, Indigenous, people of color students where they are. I am familiar with this program. Can you suggest other culturally appropriate treatment models in therapy?
Okay, so thank you for that question. So in full transparency, I, don't have the catalog of, these culturally sensitive treatment models and interventions in my head. The way that I have gone about utilizing them is just, as I have been in my short career, because this is my second year as a full-time counselor out of school, I have tended to, when I get a new client who is from a diverse background, there are two ways that I go about trying to determine what is culturally appropriate for them. And the first is that this may sound rudimentary, but I actually go back to my Sue and Sue textbook, which is my counseling culturally diverse individuals. And it has chapters on counseling different groups of people, and they break it down by race, ethnicity, even religious affiliation. And that book tends to have a lot of really helpful resources, as well as just reminders of everything from some of the communication differences that I might experience while working with that client that I need to be aware of. So for example, eye contact, like I know, when I'm working with some of my Asian clients and they're not making as much eye contact with me, in my everyday life, if I weren't thinking in this way, I might think, oh my gosh, that person so rude. They're not even making eye contact, and while we're talking, that's disrespectful. Or, are they being avoidant? Why aren't they looking at me? But I can remind myself that, within the Asian culture, a lot of times making direct eye contact with someone that they perceive to be like an authority figure can be seen as disrespectful. So it's not, that they are trying to be rude, or that, they're not listening or they're not focusing, but that's just a cultural, consideration that I have to be aware of. So that's kind of where I start, like going back and reminding myself of those things. And then the next thing that I'll do is look at the primary presenting concern, and then I will go do research on that and try and see what I can find as far as treatment models or approaches that have empirical backing as far as being more or less effective for individuals of a certain identity. Does that make sense? Okay. Looks like someone posted a comment that said, thank you for this informative presentation. We have to also remember that oftentimes the research is lagging behind real life. Preach. That is very true. Like, as a lot of us, know, research takes a lot of time. It can be a lengthy process, and by the time you get certain things approved and you've written things up, maybe the actual survey that you conducted or or experiment, by that time, that might be something that you did a year or 2 or 3, ago. So I think that is important to remember, and that, that lived experience, that is gold. Just, really trying to dive into our clients' lived experience.